What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new to the channel, my name is AkeemHaynes. I'm a two-time Olympic bronze medalist, author, motivational speaker, and sports commentator. On my channel, we talk boxing, MMA, track and field, and of course, motivation and encouraging content. If this is something that you enjoy, then I hope that you subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get into the video. Tim Tszyu versus Tony Harrison, 12 rounds for the WBO junior middleweight interim title over in Australia. This is an interesting matchup, and to be honest, this is a fight that could go either way. But let's start with the Australian Tim Tszyu. 21 wins, 0 losses, and 15 wins by way of knockout. We know he was supposed to fight Jermell Charlo, but Jermell, I think, pulled out for injuries, if I remember correctly. And he's taking a fight against a guy who gave Jermell Charlo his first loss. So that already tells you the caliber fighter that Tony Harrison is when he's on his game. So this is not an easy fight for Tim Tszyu, and I respect him for taking such a dangerous fight. Now, I didn't know much about Tim Tszyu until around the time when I retired from track and field. So that's what, 2017. So probably around 2017, 2018 was when I started hearing about Tim Tszyu. I remember when he fought a guy named Ruben Webster, who had a respectable record at the time, 8-0 before that fight, who was a up-and-coming, very good domestic fighter. I remember in that fight, Ruben Webster's team threw in the towel, I think in the 5th or the 6th round. But man, Tim Tszyu put his hands on Ruben Webster, right? But it didn't look like he did that, right? Because Tim Tszyu didn't seem like a very big puncher like that. But on one hand, right, when someone throws in a towel, it's usually because the trainer sees their fighter is taking too much punishment and they want to save their fighter. So what I was seeing and what was happening, it seemed to be two completely different stories, because again, that was my first eye of seeing him, right? And he didn't look like he was that big of a puncher, but he was clearly doing work and he was clearly hurting his opponents. But anyway, after that fight, he's climbing the ladder, winning most of his fights by knockout. So it started to make me say it's clear that he's got like deceiving strength and a power about him, right? 2019, he fights Joel Calamari and wins by unanimous decision in a good fight against a good opponent. Then he fights Dwight Ritchie. That was a fight for me where I saw the complete package of his potential, right? He looked great in that fight, using his jab to set up his shots, good combinations, mixing in different arrays of punches. His selection was on point, good solid head movement, didn't stay in the same spot for too long. He kept moving. He just looked sharp in that fight and looked very dialed in. And even though he didn't get the knockout, right, there was no doubt, no debate who the winner of that fight was. And Dwight Ritchie had a very good, solid record. Domestically, he was one of the top fighters in that division. And unfortunately, later that same year, he passed away. I think if I read correctly when it did happen, I'm just going off memory, I think it was a sparring session and it was a body shot and something happened during that shot and he went back to his corner and he passed out and they couldn't revive him. So, it's another unfortunate story. As a reminder of like, man, these guys are stepping inside the ring and risking their lives. So regardless of whether they win, lose, or draw, we still got to commend them and respect for the fact that they're going into the ring to risk their lives for a dream that, a lot of people probably think is crazy towards them. So I think it's important that we take a moment to pay our respects to Dwight Ritchie. Now, the following year, he steps in the ring with one of the Australian greats, Jeff Horn, the former WBO welterweight champion who won that belt from when he fought Manny Pacquiao. Jeff Horn, who's also been in the ring with who many people think is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Terrence Bud Crawford. So now we get to see what Tim Tszyu is about, right? Now we get to see if he can fight these championship quality fighters. I know many people have mixed feelings about Jeff Horn, right? But he's a champion, so we got to give him that respect in the fight. Now, Tim Tszyu in that fight, man, kept his discipline, right? Horn looked like he wanted to get under his skin. It was a lot of holding. It was a lot of Horn awkwardly rushing forward with his head down and looping shots. It wasn't a pretty fight by no means, but it was a fight where Tim Tszyu didn't let his emotions get the best of him, right? He kept his cool and capitalized on the openings, and he countered efficiently, landing solid uppercuts and pushed Jeff back on the back foot and had him retreating with his hands down, right? And you could see that Tim Tszyu was in complete control of the fight. And if it wasn't for Horns holding, I think he would have been stopped earlier than the 8th round, right? I thought it was a very good performance, and his body work in that fight was exceptional as well. It was a great performance in another fight where you say, man, this guy continues to get better. He's improving, and he is starting to really grow into the division. Last year, Tim Tszyu fought Terrell Gausha, 2012 Olympian with boxing skills, who's fought Erislandy Lara and Erickson Lubin. And even though he lost those fights, you still get that experience of fighting the best in the division. So this was not an easy fight for Tim Tszyu. But Tim Tszyu was on that night, especially after that knockdown, more of a flash knockdown, I would say, right? He had Gausha on the ropes most of that fight, was landing shot after shot. But the crazy thing about that was, Gausha kind of put himself on that back foot, kind of put himself on the ropes, because he would throw a jab and then he would back up, right? And Tim Tszyu definitely saw that. He definitely caught on to that, because every time that Gausha would back up, Tim Tszyu would press forward and use where he was inside of the ring to really impose his will and to let his hands go and break down his opponent. It was another great fight for Tim Tszyu, and another fight that I said to myself, man, I'm like, man, this guy continues to improve. And the moment so far doesn't seem like it's been too big for him, right? So another good performance, another step up for him, especially in this fight against Tony Harrison. Now, Tim is in his best years right now, and he's fighting like he has something to prove. He wants Charlo, but this is another great test right here in front of him, and he cannot look through Tony Harrison. Even though Tony Harrison may have 3 losses, this is not a guy that you can take for granted. Let's talk about his opponent, Tony Harrison. 29 wins, 3 losses, 1 draw, 21 wins by way of knockout. He's fought twice for the title already. 2017, he fought Jarrett Hurd, who we just saw this weekend and didn't look great. But from 2018 and down, I mean, Jarrett Hurd was a dog, right? And he stopped Tony in the 9th round and won the IBF light middleweight title. And Tony Harrison was up on the cards prior towards how that fight ended. He gets another title shot against the champ now, Jermell Charlo, in 2018, and won unanimously over Jermell Charlo. I know a lot of people have different feelings about that fight, but this isn't a guy who has not fought quality opponents. He's fought great championship level opposition and knows how to deal with pressure. He's got 3 losses on his resume, but at the same time, it's a fight. And in high level sports, right, someone has to win, someone has to lose. And we'll touch on those losses in just a sec. Tony Harrison has the height advantage of 4 inches and the reach advantage of 6 inches. Harrison is a big dude compared to Tim Tszyu. Not to mention, if we're talking about skills, I think Tony is the more skilled fighter in the sense of pure boxing ability to me. He's fast, uses his jab well, good combination puncher, sharp reflexes. He's got good power, and you can tell he's got high IQ in the ring, and he's a thinker in the ring. I mean, this is a guy who coaches as well too, and coaches Alicia Baumgardner, right? And you know how well she has been doing inside of the ring and the breakup that she's having. So he is smart in the ring. He can see things and make adjustments on the fly. He's tactical in his approach. And if you let him control the tempo of the fight, he'll pick you apart, right? With his reach and his speed and his power, he attacks you from different angles and walks you down and sets you up in some shots that favor him. He's explosive and dynamic. And sometimes you see athletes whose things just come to them naturally, right? And Tony's one of those guys. He's got the natural skills, very smooth in the ring. Early on in his fights, right? The first 5 to 6 rounds, man, he is a beast. Like, he looks magnificent. But when he's lost, it's been in the later rounds of the fights. When he fought Willie Nelson, I'm pretty sure everyone had him up on the cards, if I remember correctly. He looked great through 5 and 6 and 7. But then as the fight got a little deeper, his output started to slow down. He started to walk into some shots and his hands wasn't coming up as high as they usually do. His high guard wasn't as strong and sturdy, and he was a bit more stagnant in his movement. And then Nelson lands a shot in the sweet spot and drops him. And though he got up, you could tell that he was not in any shape to continue that fight. 3 fights later, he fights Jarrett Hurd. And in the first few rounds, that man looked sharp, catching Hurd with combinations, really outboxing Hurd and catching him cleanly, using his footwork to be mobile, right? Counter punching very well. I was like, man, Tony Harrison, he is back. He is in fine form. But then going into the 7th round, his output started to slow it down. And what it looked like to me was that he just gassed out, right? His shots weren't really hurting Hurd the same, not backing him up like how he was early on. Hurd continued to come forward, throwing lots of different shots at Harrison, right? Harrison was caught on the ropes and he just didn't look like he had much left to keep up with the constant pressure of Hurd. And he got caught with a few uppercuts before Hurd landed that straight right hand that dropped him and it was over with. So again, we saw he's strong early in the first part of the fight and he starts to fade just a little bit in the second half of the fight and then he gets clipped with the shot. Then he goes on to fight Jermell Charlo for the first time. I thought he fought a much more control fight at a pace that helped him finish the fight more responsibly, right? Not to mention he fought a great fight that fight, man, countering Charlo beautifully, using his jab, mixing up his attack, staying off the ropes and not being stagnant. And he didn't let Charlo impose his size and his frame, using Charlo's momentum against him, right? Stayed disciplined and fought within himself. He got hit with some shots as well, which kind of showed me that he can stand up and take a shot, right? It's not every shot that a boxer takes that drops them or hurts them or knocks them out, right? You got to really connect on that sweet spot, right? But I thought he built up a lead early on in that fight and held on to win. Now, people thought it was mixed decision. People still thought Charlo did enough to win, but the outcome was the outcome, and Tony Harrison got the win. But his counter punching was very exceptional in that fight. But that's what he can do. He's that good of a boxer, and he can rise to the occasion. I thought in his most recent fight last year when he fought Sergio Garcia, he looked very good, very sharp. Everything was behind the jab for him, and that's what he is going to need to do and establish early in this fight. He looked very good going into the second half of the fight in that area where he's had downfalls in previous times before. So I really like what I saw last of Tony Harrison. So who wins? It's a tough fight for both men, but it's a necessary fight for both men at this stage in their careers. Now, if Tony Harrison doesn't win this fight, I don't think he'll get another opportunity to fight for a championship, right? Tim, on the other hand, hasn't lost before, so he doesn't know what it feels like to lose to date. He's fighting with something to prove. And I think he's obviously fighting for a title shot. And many people think he's also fighting with that notion of getting out of his father's shadow. So for me, in the early rounds, I favor Tony Harrison. If he can get behind the jab and build the momentum and lock in, not just with his hands, but with his footwork, I think he can build up a lead and control the early part of that fight. But if he doesn't stop Tim Tszyu, right, or slow him down or discourage him, and the fight continues to go on, I favor Tim Tszyu because he's going to continue to come forward. He's going to hit the body and try and slow down Harrison. And in fights that we've seen, he seems to get stronger as the fight goes on. It's a tough one to say, right? I mean, in these predictions, right, it's what you favor more. It's a fight, and we know anything can happen in a fight at any given moment. So my mind is telling me, man, go with Tim Tszyu, maybe by late stoppage or decision, not to mention that Tim Tszyu is at home. The hometown crowd is right there, right? We know what that can do and all that entitles, right? So it makes sense to go with Tim Tszyu. But my heart is telling me to go with Tony Harrison. So I'm going with Tony Harrison to win this fight by some form of decision. Maybe it's mixed decision or split decision. And I think he can win this fight by decision. I think he builds up the early lead in the early rounds, and he holds on in the latter rounds to win this fight. I think it's a 50-50 fight, and it'll be interesting to see how it does unfold. What are your thoughts on this fight? Who do you have winning this one? Let me know in the comment section below. If you would like to support the channel, there's a couple ways that you can do so. You can like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you would like to support by way of donation, you can find options in the description below. Also, my Cash App handle will be on screen as well. Any amount goes towards the growth of this channel and will be greatly, greatly appreciated. So with all that being said, if you've been watching the video this time, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, and we'll definitely see you next time.